8 years ago, the Kenya Film Classification Board banned the film Rafiki for what it called promotion of lesbianism after director Wanuri refused to change the ending. While Rafiki went on to receive praise at major international festivals like Cannes, queer Kenyans were left experiencing the film only through conversations and reviews coming from outside the country. Wanuri later took the Kenyan government to court, arguing that the film needed to be shown locally in order to qualify for that year's Academy Awards. The ban was briefly lifted for 1 week in September 2018, and the screenings in Nairobi drew large, enthusiastic crowds who celebrated the film as a milestone for queer Kenyan cinema. Now, Rafiki has scored another win because on January 23rd, Kenya's Court of Appeal ruled that the laws used by the Kenya Film Classification Board to ban the film were unconstitutional and violated protections for freedom of expression. In a statement shared online, Wanuri described the ruling as powerful and affirmed its wider impact. The Court of Appeal's ruling now allows Wanuri to challenge and request a review of the ban, opening the door for the film to receive an age-appropriate rating and to be screened in Kenya. The decision marks an important step in pushing back against the suppression of queer voices and artistic censorship, especially as filmmakers like Wanuri continue to reshape Kenya's film scene with bold and diverse stories. 8 years ago, my film Rafiki was banned in Kenya because it told a love story about two women, Wanuri wrote. The ruling is bigger than one film. It's for filmmakers, artists, musicians, anyone who uses words, ideas, or images. It's for Kenyans who voted and fought for our 2010 constitution. This is because our ideas are not crimes. If ever I have to give a list of my top five movies, Rafiki is definitely in there. I love the storytelling in Rafiki, and I feel like Rafiki is a very important story. And because of this, I want to talk about censorship in Africa. I want to talk about censorship in Africa as a whole, like briefly, and then I want to go on to talk about the history of censorship in South Africa as well as censorship in Zimbabwe by pointing out this one instance. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about censorship in Africa. Despite signing international agreements that promise press freedom, the reality across much of Africa is very different. Media freedom is in a bad place, and in many countries, it's getting worse fast. According to early findings from Round 11 of the African Institute for Development Policies, Africa Integrity Indicators, only two countries, Namibia and South Africa, scored well when it came to protecting the media from state censorship. A few others did okay, but the vast majority, 48 countries to be exact, scored poorly, showing just how common media censorship still is across the African continent. In some countries like Eritrea, there is no private media at all. In others, state owned media openly act as mouthpieces for those in power, while journalists who report critically are harassed, beaten, or even jailed. Taken together, the message is clear. Press freedom may exist on paper, but in practice, it is under serious attack across the African continent. The woeful performance of the continent generally on indicators related to press freedom make it very clear that there is need for countries to introspect deeply on how their media repression is impacting on the enjoyment of citizens' rights to freedom of expression, which they voluntarily committed themselves in various international treaties. Countries need to relax punitive legislation and unwarranted regulatory mechanisms that stifle the free flow of information, which is a crucial ingredient of democracy. States also need to submit themselves to higher standards of ensuring the safety of media workers and providing a functional environment for their operations. Censorship in modern day South Africa isn't really prevalent as it was back under apartheid. Because under apartheid, the government would implement extensive censorship laws that were aimed at suppressing and controlling the narrative surrounding racial segregation. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to give a rundown, or rather a timeline of some sort, of the censorship laws that the apartheid regime would use to control the narrative on what was going on in South Africa during apartheid. In 1914, the Reuters Assemblies Act stated that the state could ban publications that might cause quote unquote hostility between black people and white people with no proof needed. Later in 1956, the act was updated to include that even reporting on banned gatherings is a crime. In 1927, Bantu Administration Act made it illegal to say or do anything that the state claimed could create racial antagonism. So basically, speaking out was risky because it could be deemed as against this act. In 1953, the Criminal Law Amendment Act targeted the ANC by criminalizing any actions that encouraged people to break unjust laws. And later that same year, the Public Safety Act allowed the government to declare a state of emergency and shut down newspapers at will. In 1956, the Official Secrets Act banned publishing anything about the military, police, or state security. In 1959, the Prisons Act stated that you couldn't publish anything about prisoners or prisons without state approval. In 1963, the Entertainment Act, and in 1974, the Publications Act set up censorship boards to ban books, films, ads, and magazines deemed politically dangerous. In 1964, the Customs Act gave the government power to block undesirable books and materials from entering the country. In 1967, the Defense Amendment Act made publishing information about the army illegal under the excuse of quote unquote national security. In 1969, the General Law Amendment Act allowed the state to declare areas off limits to the press. That meant journalists couldn't even mention them. And later that same year, the BOSS Act, or rather the BOSS Act, criminalized any reporting on the Bureau of State Security or its detainees. Even court evidence, including BOSS, could be hidden. In 1971, the Newspaper and Imprint Registration Act forced newspapers to register and hand over personal details of editors and staff as a clear intimidation tactic. In 1982, the Internal Security Act pulled together most security laws and directly targeted quote unquote subversive publications. And in 1986 as well as 1987, emergency regulations meant that journalists were banned from reporting on protest, unrest, or restricted areas, which was silencing resistance in real time. Members of the South African band Freshly Ground were stopped from entering Zimbabwe just a few hours before they were due to perform at the closing night of the Harare International Arts Festival, aka HIFA, in 2010. The band later said that the country's political leaders, quote unquote, still haven't found a sense of humor. Freshly Ground was turned away at the Harare International Airport and sent back home with no clear or official reason given at the time. Zimbabwe's state-owned newspaper, The Herald, later quoted a regional immigration officer who claimed that the band did not have valid work permits. However, HIFA organizations pushed back, saying that all performers, including Freshly Ground, had paid the necessary fees, received approval from the National Arts Council, and secured temporary work permits. However, many believe that the real reason for the ban was Freshly Ground's 2010 song Chicken to Change, which criticizes former President Robert Mugabe for refusing to step down from power. When the song was first released, the band's visas for a Harare concert were quickly revoked. Nearly 4 years later, it appears that Zimbabwean authorities still haven't moved past the messaging in the music. The song Chicken to Change sounds fun and upbeat, but it carries a serious political message. In the video, Robert Mugabe is shown sitting quietly at the back of a presidential car, reading a newspaper called Bob's Time. The headline celebrates a glorious victory for ZANU PF. The scene then switches to Freshly Ground performing in a shebeen, dancing like chickens and openly calling out Africa's long serving leader, urging him to let go of his 30-year hold on power. Lead singer Zolani Mahola starts by acknowledging Mugabe's role in Zimbabwe's independence struggle, even calling him a supernova. But the praises quickly turn into criticism. The lyrics point out how he promised to open doors for the next generation, yet still holds tightly to power, accusing him of being a chicken to change. Later, Mugabe's car suddenly stops and chicken feathers float past the windscreen. He briefly looks at a poor couple holding chickens, then ignores them and drives on. The chickens highlight the reality in rural Zimbabwe, where people often use them to trade or even pay for the transport because cash is so hard to come by. Commenting on the issue, Sarah Barnett, a spokesperson for Freshly Ground, said that the video is not an attack on Mugabe at all. It is a tongue-in-cheek challenge for him to reflect on things and become the hero he used to be, to consider his actions and surprises. We are not afraid of his reaction. Why should we be in a democratic world? Do keep in mind that this is just a short discussion on censorship in Africa brought by the court decision on Rafiki. If you would like to educate yourself more on censorship in Africa, I will leave articles linked down below. And from me, thank you for watching. I hope you liked. I hope you subscribe and comment, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.